Joseph Castle for Spectrum Channel 4, and today I'm speaking with Ashley Roy from the YWCA. February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and today we'll be talking about teen dating violence, or TDV for short, and some of the most important things that we should know about it. We're glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so my first question is, what is your position at the YWCA?
Yeah, so I'm a prevention and intervention coordinator. I work in the schools, specifically here at Ripley and Georgetown schools, and I work with students grades K through 12 to help establish healthy relationships and to reduce the instances of unhealthy relationships. And so we focus specifically on teen dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, and sexual abuse.
Okay.
And we're able to do that through prevention programs in the schools, and then we can work with referrals or resources for any students or their families that are dealing with these types of issues.
Okay. So how important is it to bring awareness to the issue of teen dating violence? In your opinion, I would say.
Yeah, it's extremely important, and if it's okay with you, I'm going to share some stats.
Okay.
So in a recent study, they found that 81% of parents did not think that teen dating violence was an issue, or they admitted that they just weren't sure if it was an issue. But when we look at recent statistics, we know that 1 in 11 female teens and 1 in 15 male teens reported experiencing physical abuse within the last year within their dating partners' relationships. We also know that 1 in 11 female teens and 1 in 15 male teens reported experiencing sexual violence within their dating relationships in the last year. And it's important to note that those are just the ones that are reported. And a lot of people don't come forward, or they wait because they're afraid of judgment. We know that 1 in 3 teens in the U.S. will experience either physical, sexual, or emotional abuse in their dating relationships before they reach adulthood. And we also know that 43% of college women reported experiencing violent or abusive dating behaviors. So when we look at the fact that we have these high numbers of incidents being reported, and yet 81% of parents just don't really realize this is taking place, awareness events like this are extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, I guess with recent generations, sexualization has kind of been hyperized a little bit, especially by the media. They push it out a little more than probably necessary, so it makes it more prevalent than ever. What would you say makes a healthy relationship?
So there are a lot of things that you really need, but healthy relationships are built when both partners have equal power in their relationship.
Okay.
Both partners feel respected, they feel valued, and they feel heard. And it's important to remember that there's not just one characteristic that's going to make a healthy relationship. There are some really core values that must be present. And those include trust, mutual respect, and that's respect for the person as an individual, for their values, belief systems, for their boundaries. Also, being able to communicate openly is very important, and being able to resolve conflict calmly and respectfully.
For sure.
Both dating partners really need to be able to maintain their individuality. And
Definitely.
yeah, it's extremely important. They need to be able to do that without feeling pressured or guilty. They should maintain their friendships, time with their family, and their personal interests as well.
Yeah, you definitely don't want your relationship ruining any other relationships, because then it kind of becomes a little too hyper-focused on it. You have to be able to still maintain somewhat of a normal life at least. So what are some tips for teens to be able to start a healthy relationship once they start dating?
I love this question. I think it's important, though, to back up just a little bit, because you have to develop some skills in order to have a healthy relationship. So kind of like I mentioned before, some things that you need to think about as individuals before you even enter into a relationship is the ability to speak assertively, which means you're able to speak up in a respectful way, about yourself, to stand up for yourself while respecting that other person. You also really need to at least have a basic understanding of some conflict management. And you need to be able to understand and recognize your own feelings so that you can communicate those clearly. These types of skills are really going to set a person up to be able to set boundaries, and that's going to help them to stay safe and feel respected, and it's going to support a really healthy relationship. But if you're already fast forwarding into that dating relationship, I think that one of the most important things you can do, especially in the very early stages, is to set really clear boundaries. And that is for you, but it's also for the other person. So when we set boundaries, that's going to allow us to feel safe and respected. And it's also going to ensure that, you know, the other person isn't like tiptoeing into dangerous area where they're going to get themselves in trouble. And it allows everyone to be on the same page about what's okay moving forward. The other thing is that I think it's really important to just communicate. Communicate. You can't do it too much. Tell them what kinds of things you like, what kinds of things you don't like. If you have things that you know really set you off, it's important that your partner knows that, because the goal is for you to both feel safe and respected.
Yeah, it definitely helps to have communication with each other. Definitely more so in person. You can't text all the time.
Yes.
We like to, but it's probably a little too much of a habit.
Yeah, you cannot have a healthy, it's very difficult to have a healthy relationship without some of that face-to-face interaction and contact.
For sure.
Especially if it's brand new, because you can really tell a lot about a person just by being with them and kind of knowing how you feel when you're around that person.
I agree wholeheartedly. What are some ways for an individual to make sure they are balancing their individual life with their dating life?
I love that you guys are even thinking about this question, because it's completely normal when you first, start dating someone new to just want to be all about that person.
Definitely. Yeah.
But it's not the healthiest thing to do for a lot of reasons. It's really important that there's balance in these relationships and balance in your personal life. And so you want to keep all the same friends you've always had. You want to keep all the hobbies and interests that you've always had. And you want to keep some of that time for your families separate and away from your dating partner. The person that you are dating liked you for who you were before you started dating them. So you don't want to give up the pieces of what makes you what the person fell for. That's important. And if you start to hear your friends or family saying things like, I really miss you, I feel like I haven't seen you in forever, things just don't seem the same, I think it's important to listen to those who are closest to you and just take what they're saying into consideration, because it's really easy to kind of get swept up in the excitement of a new relationship, and just make sure that you're still setting time aside for all the parts of you. I like to tell teens, when you start dating someone, you're bringing them into your life. You're adding a person to your life. You're not dumping everybody else that was there previously, and you're not unloading all the things that make you you. The person that you invite into your life is extra. It's not the only thing that you should have.
While we're on that, what do you think if, say, your partner tells you that they think you're hanging out too much with your friends, or they don't really get together as often as they would want? What would you say to someone dealing with that, and what they should do?
Yeah, I think that, a couple things. One is that you always want to hear your partner out and listen to what they're saying. It could be a sign that maybe they are a little bit insecure about you not being with them all the time, and that's something to consider. I think that's also why you have these conversations in the beginning of your relationships. Like, hey, my friends are really important to me, and I'm still going to spend time with them. That doesn't mean I don't want to spend time with you. But if it's a continuous thing where they're giving you a hard time for not always being with them, I would definitely be a little concerned about that. That's either a characteristic that needs to kind of be worked on a little bit and worked through, so that changes, or that may be a sign that that's not a good, healthy relationship for you to be in.
Okay, so what is your definition of an abusive relationship? Because I feel like maybe some people think really there's like a hard line. It has to be they're physically I guess, beating you.
Yeah. And I do think we've come a little bit further here in recent years, but I agree that some people do not see past like one area of abuse. So when we look at dating abuse or abusive relationships, you can define that as a pattern of behaviors that's used to gain or maintain power and control over the other person. So like you said, it's really important to remember that there are all types of abuse. It does not have to come in the form of physical abuse, even though that is certainly an abusive relationship. Some of the more common types of abuse we talk about are verbal, emotional, and sexual abuse. But it's also important to remember that there's also things like social abuse or financial abuse or digital or technological abuse as well. I like to kind of tell teens especially, if you feel like your quality of life has declined or feels heavier than it was before you started dating this person, that is a huge red flag that there are some majorly unhealthy things going on in that relationship.
Okay. So, what's the major reasons that abuse occurs in teen relationships?
So that's a big question, and there's a lot of reasons why. I'll talk about 2 or 3 that I see most often. So if we remember that dating abuse is defined as an attempt or an effort to gain or maintain power and control, we have to think about why somebody would want to do that in the first place. What would make them feel like they need to have that power and control? And so sometimes that is all they have seen patterned in their own lives. So maybe they're in a home where abuse is prevalent, or the relationship is just really unhealthy, and that's what's been modeled for them, and they think it's normal. You've probably heard the phrase hurt people, which is very true. And sometimes the person that we're in a relationship with has had trauma themselves that hasn't been dealt with. But more often than that, I would say that being a teenager is really tough. It's hard. And you haven't fully learned all the skills that you need to kind of interact in healthy relationships.
Definitely.
So sometimes it's not that, that's what they're seeing at home or they've had all this trauma. Sometimes it's just they haven't developed skills like conflict resolution. They haven't learned to be assertive yet. They haven't thought or learned what their boundaries are. And so they're just trying to figure all that out. And then when you couple that with the fact, teenagers are just trying to figure out who they are as a person and how to be in the world and understand their emotions, that can really lead to some unhealthy or even abusive behaviors.
Okay. Why is it so difficult for teens to leave an abusive relationship? Because I feel like I've even heard it in school, like a lot of people that just feel really committed to a relationship, even if in their heart they think it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
They'll talk about it. They'll say, honestly, this person's kind of sucked to be around. We should probably stop, but he's really a sweetheart. And it's like all that stuff. It's like, well, why don't you just leave it?
Yeah.
You know it's a bad idea.
And it can be really frustrating as their friend watching that or the family member watching that kind of play out. And I think, again, there's multiple reasons why teenagers choose to stay in unhealthy relationships. I think, first of all, it's really hard to talk to people when it's a topic that people don't get excited to talk about. Sometimes if we pretend like things aren't happening, that really closes the door for offering open communication. And so that's one reason we need to help spread awareness about the prevalence. But another really common concern I hear from teens is that they're afraid that nobody will believe them, or they're afraid that if they leave this person, that they may not be able to find another person or another boyfriend or girlfriend or someone to date, which to me as a professional and a parent leads to the bigger issue of that student's self-esteem and self-worth. And so that's something that can be developed and worked on so that they realize that they don't have to have a dating partner to be happy or successful in life. There's also some situations where the teen is in a very abusive relationship and they're afraid of retaliation, and they feel very isolated. And so in those types of situations, it's really important that students and their parents know that there are resources and there is help and there are protections for teens that are in these situations, in a school setting, in the community, and even legal actions and protections that can be taken if needed.
Yeah, I think some people kind of feel like even though there's like one aspect of their relationship they don't like, sometimes it's really bad and it should mean they should leave, but they like everything else and they don't think they could find it anywhere else. And
Yeah.
I just think, your life's just begun.
Yeah.
You can easily go out and probably find someone else that is even way better than the partner you originally found.
And I think that, that's part of knowing kind of who you are and what you want and what you deserve. And when you have a clear picture of that, which, most teenagers don't, they might start to have a glimpse of that. That's normal development, but you start to realize that you do not need to be with someone else to feel fulfilled or happy, because that person's not going to do that for you. You have to have self-worth and self-love before you can really be okay with being alone. It's okay to be single. I promise.
There's plenty of people that just live like that.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so, if they can do it, we can do it too. You can wait. How does alcohol or drugs play a factor in teen dating abuse? Because I don't know if you know, but drugs and alcohol are kind of a little bit of a thing here.
Yeah.
In this area specifically.
Yes.
I think.
It's a huge issue, and it plays a huge factor in relationships. So from a legal standpoint, we have to talk about consent. So, you have to have consent to enter into any type of physical relationship. And under the law, you cannot legally consent if you are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So just from a legal standpoint, that becomes an issue. The other thing is, it's really important to remember that when you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, your behaviors change and your impulse control is a little bit weaker.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I've sat with many teens who were just crushed because, they made a decision they weren't ready for because that impulse was just not quite as strong as it needed to be because they were under the influence. And so, it's really important that you remember your judgment is not going to be the same if you're using drugs and alcohol.
Definitely.
You may also be more aggressive. I've known, situations where a teen was like, I can't believe they acted that way. They've never been aggressive with me, but it's because they were under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And so, you want to make sure that your decision making is at its full capacity, and drugs and alcohol are not going to help that.
For sure.
Of course, I highly discourage teens using drugs or alcohol for many, many reasons. But it's especially important to not be making decisions about entering into any type of physical relationship while you are under the influence, because you are likely going to make a decision you normally wouldn't, and that can lead to a lot of regrets and heartache as well.
Definitely. I think you and I can both agree that there's definitely some drugs that just, even in general, people that aren't even in a relationship just shouldn't get involved with.
Yeah.
But I know some people really want to get to a point where they can start kind of like drinking at parties like they would with their buds and their friends. So what point do you think that they would get to? Obviously there's a legal point, but you think a point in their relationship that they could get to where they can be comfortable, I guess, drinking around each other, or one drinking with their friends? You understand what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever a good idea. First of all, we got to think about, the legal age to be able to consume alcohol. And so I would never encourage a teenager to get to the point where they're comfortable with that, not only just for the sake of the relationship, but for their well-being too. So we know that teenagers, their brains are still developing, and that prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until they turn 25, around 25. And when you add drugs and alcohol into that, you are going to damage pieces of that prefrontal cortex. And, that part of the brain is responsible for decision making and thinking and planning. So not only are you going to be at risk for, making risky decisions in your relationship, but it can affect other areas of your life too.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I personally don't think it's a great idea.
Yes.
If you're an adult and you're a consenting adult and, that's something you've thought through, that's a different story. But yeah, for teens, I would steer clear at all costs.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I know technically the legal drinking age is not within the teen years,
Hmm.
but I think you and I both know people a lot of times still find a way to get their hands on it anyway.
Yeah.
And I think, like if it's gonna be there, at least like have some idea of what you're going to do with your partner, in the case that consumption does happen.
Yeah, and you need to remember that, when we go back to the topic of consent,
Hmm.
you cannot legally consent to entering into that relationship. And unfortunately, we see teens do this because they think that the other person's okay with it. But what happens when you wake up the next morning and regret it and you're like, I didn't want to do that? Now you have
Yeah.
a legal issue. Or your parents find out and you're like, I didn't want to do that. And so now, legally, you weren't able to consent. And so you've entered into this relationship that can get you into a ton of trouble, not just on a personal level, but even legally.
Okay, I agree. How could the couple work together to discuss and make decisions as one without resorting to abuse or dominance over the other? Because I think that kind of happens sometimes where they just don't really know how to converse with each other and settle
Yeah,
things.
I agree. And some of this just takes practice and learning kind of from your mistakes, but you definitely can work on those communication skills, like in your friendships and with your parents and in a school setting. You can learn conflict resolution skills, and you have to remember that, it's going to take a little bit of time to get to know this person that you're with, and be okay with that. I think it's important to make sure that you're being really clear and specific, and it's never a bad idea to kind of, when you're listening to your partner, repeat back what you think you hear them saying, because a lot of times miscommunications occur that way. We just are like filtering it through what we think we hear, and that can be an issue. Sometimes, like if there's a conflict, the best thing to do is to just kind of table it and say, hey, we need to both be calm when we talk about this. Let's take a little space, take some time to clear our heads, and then return back to the conversation. Because you don't want to get in a situation where things escalate and ugly, harsh things are said, because then you have, a whole new problem. You want to be respectful always of the person you're with. And if you know yourself well enough to know, okay, I'm about to lose my cool and I care about this person, it's the mature thing to do to just let them know that you need a little space and that you'll return back to the conversation.
Yeah, I think sometimes people don't really identify the point where it's like, I'm not emotionally stable. I should probably handle this at a different time.
Yeah.
So I should just walk away. I just don't think that really clicks with people
Yeah.
in the moment. Usually they just want to jump to it.
Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of where experience comes into play, because if you do that a couple times and it goes really bad, you kind of learn like, oh man, I should have waited. I should have taken a little bit of time. That's also why earlier in our conversation I said, it's really important to be able to know your emotions and how you're feeling, so that you know how to best take care of yourself when you feel that way. And that way you can say to your partner, hey, I really do care about you, and I know this is important, but I want to be respectful when we talk about this, and I just need a minute. And if the person you're with respects you, they will respect that request.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can teen dating violence occur through social media outlets? Which I think the answer is a bit obvious.
Yeah.
If you've ever been on Facebook, you've probably already ran into it at least once or twice.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, we go back to that definition. It's all about the attempt to gain or maintain power and control. And so a lot of, some common ways we see this play out on social media is when a dating partner tries to tell their partner who they can be friends with, who they need to block or delete. We also see a lot of them trying to monitor their partner's usage. That can mean going through messages or, obsessively going through their feed to see who's talking to them and who they're commenting back to. We also see issues with partners demanding their partner's password, which is never okay. You should never give out your passwords to anybody other than a parent. There's a lot of safety issues that go along with that. And I think at its worst is when a partner exposes their, dating partner's personal information without getting their permission to do that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's very damaging to those relationships, and it's kind of a more, I guess you could say, sneaky way to kind of, watch over and maintain that power and control. And you have to ask yourself, if you're the person doing that, why do I feel the need to do this? What's my end goal here?
Yeah.
And if you're the person on the receiving end of that, you need to be aware that those are very unhealthy and even abusive types of interactions that you're having with your dating partner.
Yeah, I feel like if you're gonna commit to a relationship, you should kind of already have a feel that this is the kind of person that you can just trust.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to go through their own accounts and their search history and see, what they've been up to. Because at that point, it's like, do you really even trust them? Why did you commit to this?
Right, and remember, trust is one of those core foundational characteristics that must be present. Nobody likes to be checked up on, and sometimes students have a hard time understanding how this is abusive or unhealthy. But I like to remind teens, the relationship you have with your parents versus your dating partner is very different. It should feel very different. You shouldn't be being monitored or looked over your shoulder by your dating partner. That's your parents' job. That's not your dating partner's job.
Can the abuser in a relationship come out and get help for themselves?
Yeah, I love this question, and I love when teens ask me this question, because a lot of times they recognize that, man, I do some of these things. And if you are someone that does these things or has these unhealthy characteristics, I just want to encourage you that you're not a horrible person, but there are some skills that you need to kind of work on. And the great news is that the types of skills that are needed in relationships, like conflict resolution, communication, those are all skills that can be learned. And if you are mature enough and aware enough to realize that you are having some problems interacting with people in a positive way, that's the first step. The rest of it is just getting connected to the right resources. And I have known lots of people who have had unhealthy relationships in the past, but did the work to learn those skills and now have thriving, healthy relationships.
Yeah, I feel like, I know online, I don't know how often you see, but sometimes people will end up finding out something that they did in the past, and they'll get called out for it and basically publicly shamed, and they kind of have to stay in secret and seek out help, whether that's from man, I forgot about it. What's the word? Therapy, there we go. Yeah, seek a therapist and just, I guess tell them their problems, work through it.
Yeah, sometimes counseling is needed in situations like this, and sometimes it's just kind of maturing and growing up and practicing, being healthy and being kind and respectful. And you don't have to be in a dating relationship to learn those skills. So I think that the earlier that parents can help their kids start to develop these skills at an age-appropriate level, that child or student is going to be a lot more capable of having really healthy relationships. And it's just so important. But I definitely don't want people to feel like if they've been unhealthy in one relationship that they're just doomed for that, because you can find ways to overcome any type of, I guess shortcomings. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but any areas that you're a little weaker in, those can be improved for sure. Yep.
Yeah, if you're dealing with that, don't give up, all right? It can improve later. Okay, so how could someone help a person who has experienced dating abuse? Sorry.
Yeah, this is a really important question, because we know that most, not all, but a lot of students are going to deal with this. And so if you are someone who doesn't experience it, you're going to have friends that probably do at some point in your life. And so the first thing that you can do, it's so simple, is just to believe your friend. If they come forward and say that they're dealing with something that's really hard or abusive, you got to remember it takes courage to come forward. And the reason a lot of people don't come forward is because they're afraid that no one will believe them. It's a very empowering thing for someone to believe you. And so that's the first easiest thing you can do. And then something else you can do is to really reinforce the message that the abuse is not their fault. A lot of times when people are abusive or extremely unhealthy, they're really good at manipulating situations and making the person feel like it's all their fault. Like if they would just act a certain way or be a certain way, they wouldn't have to treat them like that. And so it's really, really important that you just send that message. And on a more practical level, it can be helpful just to be familiar with resources, in your school or your community that you can provide to them, and just offer them and support them and encourage them.
As a parent, what would you say the best way to describe their teen what real love is?
That's a good question, and I get this a lot from parents, like how can I make sure that my teen is on the right track for healthy relationships? And I think it's really important to remember that we are modeling for our teens what's healthy and appropriate. And so, we can kind of make sure that our own relationships are healthy, remembering that our teens are watching and they're deciding for themselves based on that what's okay and not okay. And having open daily conversations with your teen about those core characteristics like trust and honesty is really important. And as parents, we can model respect and love to our child. So, for example, if I lose my cool on my teenage daughter and I just handle a situation completely wrong, it's a really productive thing for me to go back to her and say, hey, I'm really sorry. I lost my cool. You deserve to be treated with love and respect. And it's never okay for someone to talk to you that way. You're modeling conflict resolution. You're modeling how to apologize. But more importantly, you're reinforcing to that child that they are worthy of respect and no one should talk to them like that. And another little tip that you can do is, within your home dynamics, as far as, as long as it's age appropriate, I think it's good to kind of point out how your family is handling conflict and showing love. And it's also a really good idea to point out the things that you love about your partner, whether that's, a marriage or whatever. You can say things to your child like, hey, you know how I know your dad loves me? He supports all my goals and dreams. And so when children are crystal clear about what true love feels like and looks like, they're going to be super sensitive to anything other than that. And hopefully that will encourage them to not accept anything less than that too.
Yeah, I think sometimes people, whenever, especially since teens is what we're talking about, them especially, they've never really been in a relationship like that, so it might be a little less than love, but they might not see it, and they're kind of just become complacent with it,
Yeah.
To others it might be fairly obvious. It's like, he's kind of dividing himself between you, It's almost like it's not even, you're really together.
Yeah.
You agree?
I do agree with that, and I think too that that's why it's important to maintain balance too. Because one tactic that very abusive people use is that they try to isolate you from your friends and family that love you, because they can kind of point out like, hey, did you notice that was not okay? So when you look at these relationships, you may not know what it feels like to be in love. But if you know what it feels like to be respected, to feel worthy, to be, treated with kindness, that carries over into your dating relationships too. It'll be a different kind of love. It's going to be a romantic love, but those core values are going to be the same.
Okay. What would be the best way for parents to approach their teen if they feel they're in an unhealthy relationship? Because I guess sometimes they kind of just, I don't know, they don't really know how to handle it, because maybe they themselves haven't even been in one, so they don't even know what resources to reach out to or what to even tell them.
Yeah, this is a great question. And, I think that ideally, in an ideal situation, hopefully that parent has been talking with their child from the moment they could talk. And, really encouraging them and having an open dialogue about how they're feeling and what's going great in their life and what they're struggling with, because those types of conversations when children are young, make it so much easier for their teen to go to their parent because there's already that trust and communication between them. But I also want to encourage parents that if that hasn't been your experience or that's not what took place, it's never too late to build trust and build communication with your teen. So, parents need to be mindful that when teenagers are in relationships, they do feel a little bit vulnerable and they don't want to feel judged. That's the last thing they want from their parent.
For sure.
And even if that person is being unhealthy or even abusive, there's a good chance that that teen still feels loyal to the person they're dating. And so you have to kind of be careful about not slamming that other person or talking really negatively about their dating partner, because if they do care about them, that's going to build some resentment and might even shut the conversation down altogether. So, as a parent, I think asking ongoing questions is best practice. So asking teens questions about like how they're spending time with their partner and really listening, like what are you doing for fun? Knowing what drew their teen to that person, what characteristics made them interested in them and why. And just overall being curious and involved in that relationship. I think that it's a really good idea to invite your teen's dating partner to do things with the family. And that way you can see how they're interacting and what that relationship looks like, but also so that you can build trust with that dating partner. Because when both of them know that you care about them and that you love them and respect them, they're going to be a lot more open to coming to you if they do have issues. And so, the big goal is just to really keep that dialogue and communication open. I think that there are some signs you could watch for. So if your teen is having like a drastic change in mood or behavior, that's a big warning sign that something could be going on. Or if there's a change in their eating habits or like an extreme concern about their body image, that's something to look for. If they're no longer wanting to participate in hobbies or hang out with their friends, that could be a concern. There's a change in grades at schools, or if they're starting to really isolate and pull away from their family. Those are all concerns, but what's hard about that is sometimes that's normal teenage behavior. So it's really important too that you really know your teen so that you can kind of watch for any changes that might kind of tip you off that maybe something more is going on. If you see signs or if you see things that are unhealthy going on in the relationship, I think that it's important to point these out in really loving ways, in very non-threatening ways. Giving specific examples that you have seen is really helpful for teens. It's not helpful to say, well, I don't like the way they treated you. Well, can you give an example? Because I think that helps teens be able to really see what you're talking about, to think about that. You could say something like, I noticed you're no longer hanging out with your friends and you've been spending more time alone. I'm worried about you. Can you tell me what's going on? And then just being quiet. Sometimes as parents, we try to talk too much. Like, give them a chance to think and talk and just be open. I'm guilty of that as a parent, so no judgment there.
I know what you mean.
And I think it's also okay to not be afraid to directly ask your teen if they're experiencing abuse.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I know this can feel scary because sometimes it's like, what do I say? But sometimes just being direct is important, especially if you're seeing drastic changes in behavior. And again, I like to focus on the teen, not the person doing the harm. So, you can reinforce their worthiness during situations like this. So I like to give the example to parents, like if you noticed the other day that your daughter and her boyfriend got into a fight, and you can say, hey, I noticed that you got into an argument with John the other day, and the tone of the argument was really harsh and sarcastic. I hope you know you deserve to be talked to with respect. Can you tell me what happened? Does this happen often? And then just letting that dialogue roll out. And, usually if you get teens to start talking, they don't stop. But you gotta just, give them the opportunity to do those things.
For sure.
And the best thing you can do is really just to provide a really safe place where teens feel loved and respected and not judged. And that's gonna help you to have conversations now and conversations in the future.
I like that you mentioned inviting
the other partner over to be with the family. Because I don't know, like, I feel like people are a little bit shifting away from that traditional dynamic with the family, but really, that is how it is. You know,
Yeah.
it's not just you and the other partner; it's you and their family.
Yeah.
So,
And as a parent, I want to know who my teen's hanging out with, whether
For
that's
sure.
a dating partner or a friend. You know, I want to make sure that things are okay. And I want them to know that I care about their friends and I care about the people that they're with. And, you know, in my house, that's a requirement. Because to me, if I have a boy that wants to date my daughter and he's not willing to meet me, I want to know why.
yeah.
Why not? what are you
sense.
hiding? You know?
It's like if you're comfortable with being with my daughter, you should be comfortable coming and seeing the family and
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, we want to know what's going on.
Mhm.
It makes
Yeah.
sense.
Is there anything you would like to add about teen dating violence that we haven't already discussed? I know we talked about a lot.
Yeah, I think that we've covered quite a bit. I will say that, you know, I've noticed kind of a trend in schools that I've been in where, you know, there's kind of been an increased sense of I need to be with someone. And I just want to point out that, you know, currently we're a year into a pandemic and there's been a lot of isolation. And that can lead to, you know, a lot of mental health issues and a lot of just loneliness. And I think it's important that as parents, you know, we keep this in mind, that now that we're kind of starting to be back together, it's a little overwhelming, you know.
A little bit.
It is. It's overwhelming. And so just, you know, kind of keeping an eye on the fact that we're kind of just re-entering a social world and, you know, we need to be checking in with our teens and making sure that they're doing okay with all that.
I know you were talking about isolation. For me personally, I've been living with my brother in the same room because we don't have very many bedrooms in our house. So we've been in the same bedroom since like really little, ever since we bought the house. And recently he's actually gone out to college in Ohio State. And yeah, I've been in the room by myself. We still have the bunk bed, but I'm the only one on it. So I know how it's like to kind of feel a little more alone. My sister's still there, but it's not the same.
Yeah, and you know, it's almost like not only teens but adults too. We have to learn how to re-engage in social settings. We've spent a lot of time on, you know, cell phones and the computer and stuff, and some of those really basic skills that you need to interact with each other and have those relationships, like making eye contact and actually talking instead of texting.
Yes, definitely.
You know, you have to kind of get used to that again, and I think it's just part of the world we live in right now. But it's important that you're kind of just being mindful and keeping an eye on what's going on.
Yeah, and if you're one of those people at home watching this, that all you can do is text with your partner, get together sometime, all right? You know, like, it's not that hard.
Thank you, Mrs. Roy, for taking the time to talk with me and educate us on teen dating violence. It was really a pleasure having you.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm Joseph Castle, and this is Spectrum Channel 4 signing out.